Hey folks, welcome back to the interview. This is an exciting day for me. I got to tell you what happened. So I'm on my messenger, and out of the blue, I get a call from this attorney I've been trying to, have another chat with here lately, Kerri Graham. She's with us now, and I can't tell you how excited I was that she has a few minutes because Kerri deals in the family law arena, and as you can imagine, it's been really busy for her. Sadly, and on one note, sadly, the divorce rates for people 50 and older are climbing. And there was a lot of divorces that were held off during the slowdown or during the pandemic. And since a lot of this has opened up, Kerri's been really busy. But I'm always excited to talk to her because she always brings a breath of fresh air and enlightens us on areas that, especially in the family law arena, that are good for you to know. So, Kerri, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time.
It's always a pleasure. That was way too flattering of an intro. Thank you.
Well, it was true and it is still true. You bring so much to the table, especially in this family law arena. You come from a great background. If people want to learn more about it, they can watch your previous video. We're not going to take up too much of your time with that, but they can see how your awesomeness carried into this practice. So, Kerri, we were talking here a little bit. We've talked and working with companies that are being sold as they're going through a divorce. We're dealing with other issues of divorces that you're dealing with. I know you spend some good amount of time in mediation and in court. What do people what do people need to know going into a divorce? What can you give us some tidbits to make it a little bit easier as they're going through this process?
Yeah, I think, what I see in families is it takes a long time to make a decision to restructure, right? So, especially if you have children or you're at retirement age, you've spent a lot of time investing in this future, and now that future is going to take a shift. And so, folks have a hard time getting to that decision. But what I find is a lot of times once they get there, they're ready and they're ready to do it right now. And so, a lot of times I find myself saying, I'm so glad you've reached a decision you feel great about, but we need to maybe slow down and get some information, because in the process for divorce, once you start going down the decision making path, it is really hard to go back. And so we want to make sure that we have kind of a team approach. There's so much involved with, someone like me who's doing the legal side, especially someone like you. When we're restructuring our family, the financial situation, it's just going to change. And we want to make sure that we're making informed decisions. And so a lot of the path for me is including someone like you who's very knowledgeable and who can help us understand what is best going to suit the client, in the long run, so that when we're looking to file, we're getting to mediation, getting to a trial date, we know exactly what we need for the client and why. And that's not what I do. I don't do money. I do law. And so for me, I'm asking people to slow down. Let's come up with an informed plan. Let's have several conversations so that we have a path forward and we don't end up tripping up over something that a little bit of pre-legwork would have really helped us avoid.
I appreciate that. I get where you're coming from. There's a couple main topics that I tend to run across, and I'd like to ask you. By the way, folks, this is not scripted. These are all free flow conversations, just so you know. So Kerri has no idea what I'm about to ask. This is fun.
So true.
Uh, uh, but we may record this 10 times. No, just kidding. We just do. We don't even edit. We just play on through. So one area that I get a lot of questions on is life insurance. Do we have life insurance on the spouse? Who owns it? My recommendation as an agent has always been one spouse owns it on the other. Don't expect the other spouse to own it and pay for it. That's something that I think you should have control of if you want to insure the other. Can you speak to that at all from a legal perspective? Who do you think should own a policy on the other, how that should be structured?
Yeah, I actually agree with you for the most part. When we're looking at policies, a lot of times we're using them to ensure that if someone were to die unexpectedly, or maybe we have a special needs child or a kid with a special medical or a spouse with a special medical situation, it's really scary to think that your future, your child's future is being held up by someone who you've chosen to not spend the rest of your life with, right? So typically those relationships, while there's always hope and potential they can improve, usually they deteriorate. And so I think you're right about the ownership. So having that control and the security of knowing that you will get that money that you are planning on needing is really important. I think it's a really important part of the plan.
Thank you. I think structuring ownership and then, of course, beneficiaries. I see a lot of questions come through Facebook. I was mentioning to you a minute ago, where people say, "I'm going through probate, and I'm not sure who owns the insurance policies." And that always there's two things that always get to me: ownership and beneficiary. Make sure the beneficiary is accurate. So thank you for that. And it's nice to be validated. I'm, in agreement with, hey, in agreement with an attorney. It's my day here today. The other area that I see is the quadros is, we've got assets accumulated, either qualified or non-qualified. And it's a splitting of those assets, which, you and I've talked about, really take some planning behind.
Right.
What do you do and typically do in this arena? Somebody's got accumulated a few $1,000,000 in their retirement account. Maybe the husband's accumulated, the wife's maybe been stay-at-home mom, or vice versa. How do you manage this kind of a distribution? What do you do?
So that's where I like having my financial planner involved, because depending on who I represent, I might represent someone who's not worried about cash flow or expenses that need to be met each month, and I might have a client who really needs to generate some income. And so when we look at which assets are going to be more advantageous, I want my financial planner involved. I want to talk about what's our tax plan, right? So we have to cash things out, and you've got an IRA, we've got a problem. We need to make sure that we're structuring it in a way that's beneficial and not ultimately going to cost money. So I think the front end, where I talked about having a plan, is a sit down meeting for looking at those assets, coming up with an understanding of what the new monthly budget's going to look like. So we need to plan for that. And then, talking to someone like you and making sure that we know these assets are going to be, do they need a QDRO, right? Or can they be divided? What are the fees? And then making sure that we're talking about who's going to pay those fees too, because we don't want someone to be, there's always a fee to use that QDRO. So we want to know what those fees are ahead of time. We don't want to go into a mediation or a trial and not know those things.
Sure.
So I think that's where the teamwork, it's kind of cliche, but teamwork makes the dream work. And that's how we keep happy clients. And that's how we keep, folks coming back. So that's really important to me.
Well, to your point in the very beginning here, planning is the key. Sitting down, like you said, we've emotionally gotten to this point, which is hard for a lot of people.
Yes.
And now we've emotionally gotten there. I see people want to go really quick, but maybe we should slow down to go fast. And as you said earlier, put that plan into place. I find this comes exceptionally critical in business ownership. I run into situations where husband and wife have put a lot of their time, sweat, and tears and money back into the business, back into the entity. Now, the entity's been valued. We've talked about valuation of entities. The entity's been valued at $5-10 million on here, but there's not a lot of cash.
Right.
What do you do in this kind of situation? How do you break that up? What's typical?
It's hard. So if we can get the parties to agree, I think that's always better, because it's expensive to get a court to make a decision. And then we're also typically having to hire experts, and experts cost a lot of money. And people think their lawyers are expensive. They're usually real sad when they see their expert fees, because for what the expert does, it doesn't, your lawyer's going to court and doing all these things. You see sort of an hourly rate, but for an expert, it doesn't always work that way. And it can get pretty pricey pretty quick. So agreement's always my preference. But again, making sure that we understand that entity, how is it structured? What tax ramifications is it going to have if we do anything to it? Are there any agreements in place that are going to affect how we can change ownership? Sometimes people have real strict agreements in place. Are there any co-owners? And then I'm a fan of starting with having a CPA as part of our team, right?
You bet.
So we can get a general evaluation. They'll usually give us an idea. They aren't usually comfortable doing a full evaluation. You need a business evaluator for that. But if we can get the CPA to make a recommendation and get folks on the same page, that's super helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And as you know, we have a valuation software that I make available to you and to clients. A very accurate job. Most CPAs who fill out the information for their client agree that it's a a very fair analysis. At least it's a good starting point. Everything's negotiable. But then it's a matter of building the structure. One of the areas too that I find business people omit is the structure internally. So it's an LLC, maybe 100% of the company is to the husband or to the wife, or maybe they've got a business partner in there, but they may have an operating agreement, but not a buy-sell agreement. So
Right.
they really don't have these items spelled out, which spell them out in advance, folks. I mean, at least that's what I look at doing. Would you agree?
I do agree. In fact, when I'm dealing with folks on the estate planning side and I find out they have a business, I'm immediately wanting to address it
Mm,
because it's much harder to divide something we didn't plan properly for. And what I see is a lot of like CPAs or accountants will help folks form a structure, an entity in Texas, but they don't do the other stuff that helps protect it. And so then when we get to the point of divorce, sometimes we're in a real pickle and we really don't have any solutions that are easy. And now we have a fight, and fighting costs money,
yeah.
and nobody wants. That's just not a fun way to spend your money.
Well, and I agree 100%. I mean, I see that as well. In fact, one of the biggest complaints I hear from a lot of subject matter experts or professionals is that they're not talking together. One
Mhm.
of the things that I really work hard is keeping you and the CPA and myself in communication, which all
Right.
with all the other subject matter experts as time goes on. So even if it's somebody who comes to you as an estate plan, let's say, which I know you do very well, and you see there's a business in there, we need to make sure the operating agreement, if necessary, is in place. It's up to date. We value every year, or at least agree to a formula, because the last thing is the fight. And I know you're dealing with some fights right now and
Mhm.
some divorces, and they're emotional, to
They're
say
real
the least.
emotional, and the emotions typically run hotter as time go on. They don't usually, as time goes on, it gets a little worse. It doesn't usually get better, and so getting
Yeah.
people prepared for that's part of the process.
And the final question I'd like to bring up here today, and I thank you so much for your time and generosity and sharing this info. I see a lot of people questioning probate and what to do in probate. Can you offer any, suggestions of, people who are dealing with the process? They've recently had a death. They're not quite sure where to go and what to do. What do you, what are the first steps somebody should look at? Should they do it themselves? Should they hire an attorney? Do they have to have an attorney? Where do they start?
So for the most part, and there are exceptions, you do need an attorney. The reason you need an attorney in Texas is because when you probate a will and you become an executor, for example, you are a fiduciary, not just to the beneficiaries, which may only be you, but also to any creditors. So
Mm,
judges are not very fond of allowing us to enter into a fiduciary role when we don't understand the law and the ramifications of it. So for the most part, you need an attorney. Having said that, probate in Texas is pretty fast and it should be pretty inexpensive. There are some lesser versions of probate. We can do muniments of title, we can do small estates affidavits, we can do affidavits of heirship. So I think finding a connection with an attorney who will look at the assets and find you the smallest, least expensive process. But even at that, I mean, unless there's a will contest or you have unhappy beneficiaries, this is a fairly quick and easy process. And one that I always tell people it's really cheaper to do that than to think about trust planning. And that's probably a conversation for another day, but we
true.
shouldn't be afraid of probate in Texas. We are a very friendly state for that type of administration.
Excellent. Well, I hear that frequently from many of the estate attorneys out there, and it's good to know where the judge is going to come from. That fiduciary rule, clearly an important rule. You don't want the judge sitting there trying to
Right.
teach somebody how to do something. Come in, get your ducks in an order, and the attorney can bring that to the table.
Yeah,
Good.
for sure.
Kerri, this has been wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time. I know what you've got coming down the pike here, and I wish you the best of luck to get through what you've now got to get through. And folks, what you're hearing is my intonation there that some people didn't do proper planning, and now Kerri's having to go through and clean up a lot of emotion in there, and it's going to take a lot of her time and effort. So don't be those people. Do the planning in advance, and you won't have to have somebody like Kerri come in for weeks on end. to try to get it resolved. But I wish you the best on that, Kerri. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. It's always a pleasure. And this is a great way to end a Monday. So thank you.
Oh, that's well, that or Margaritaville, one of the two. So I'm glad
Right.
that this
We
works
should
for
do this better.
you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.